Welcome back to Temple Emanu in Orange Village, Ohio. We hope that you're having a great week and that we are beautifully headed towards the springtime. Our Torah portion this week is Terumah. Terumah, as we've discussed before, is a word for donations, a word for something that you give. In this case, it's the Terumah, the donations, that went into the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that was the temporary worship and meeting space for our ancestors as they traveled through the wilderness in the 40 years that it took them to get from the Exodus in Egypt to the promised land of Israel. The rest, most of the Torah portion, deals with the minutiae, the details of the parts that went into constructing the Mishkan and its implements, Mishkan v'kelav, as the text would talk about it and as the rabbis understand it. Of course, as you would expect, the Haftarah is taken from the 5th and 6th chapter of 1 Kings, and it is the planning, the acquisition of the material, the hiring of a general contractor to build the permanent temple in Jerusalem under the reign of King Solomon. And of course, there's a lot of differences. In one case, you have a temporary, think of a Bedouin tent, a fancy Bedouin tent that can be disassembled and travel with. And on the other hand, you have a permanent, large, monumental structure, at least for what at the time would have been considered a monumental structure, that was supposed to stand in Jerusalem forever and ever, which of course we know it did not. But in addition to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, being temporary, and the Solomon's temple being permanent, there are other differences as well. In the case of our Torah portion, we are told at the beginning of the Parashah that Moses was invited, commanded, v'kichu terumah me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, that Moses was to collect donations, the gold, the silver, the wood, the weaving, all of those things from people who were nadiv libo. Nadiv means something that you do of your free will. It's not like a neder, like kol nidre, which is a conditional if-then kind of a promise, but a nadiv is something that you give out of total free will, just out of the kindness of your heart. In fact, a nadiv in Hebrew, as we use it today, is a philanthropist. So all of the things that were needed, and we were told that Moses collected more than was necessary to build the Mishkan, were done on a totally voluntary basis. These people had already paid their maaser, their 10% tax. They had already given the required offerings. This was above and beyond total free will. When we get to King Solomon, however, we discover that as important a builder as he was, that he built by imposing taxes on people. Not only taxes of their crops and their stuff, but also a corvée, a labor tax, a kind of a draft to send people up to Lebanon to work under King Hiram in order to bring back the cedars and the other material. What's interesting to note is that in the case of Moses, who collects from people who he inspires to give out of the love of their hearts and out of free will, Solomon had to force people to contribute, had to force people to do what was necessary. In the case of the Mishkan serves, among other purposes, the purpose of taking this ragtag group of slaves who had escaped Egypt and really giving them a focal point to join together as a people. In giving for the Mishkan, people didn't ask the question, were you a born Hebrew, or did you decide to leave with the Hebrews and become a Hebrew? They didn't ask the question, what color were you? They didn't ask the question of what your family's history was and where they came from before they came from Egypt. And they didn't even ask the question, which tribe did you come from among the people of Israel? And so the Mishkan, built out of free will offerings that were inspired by Moses, Aaron, and Miriam's leadership, becomes a unifier and a builder of the people. On the other hand, Solomon's temple, which was one of the magnificent accomplishments of the kingdom of Israel in its own time, was built in some ways by governmental force. People were required to give to it. And what's the result? We know that after Solomon's life, the kingdom splits up. And that's when we get the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah or Judea that survives. And so Solomon's temple, which looked more magnificent and more permanent than the Mishkan, actually turns out to have been part of the reason, planted part of the seeds of the destruction and the splitting up of the kingdom of Israel after Solomon's reign. There's an irony here. That which was temporary leads to the permanence of a community. That which was meant to be permanent led to the dissolution of a kingdom. What's the lesson? The lesson is that we can build and make what looks like temporary gain by dividing people, by forcing them to do things that they don't want to do, that their hearts are not in. Or we can build a community, a country, by inspiring people, by calling on their better angels to become part of a national endeavor and a national project. I think this is an important lesson, not just for those of us who are studying Torah, but perhaps for all of American and all of Western society at this very difficult moment in history. Are our leaders trying to force us to do things, split us apart, or are they inspiring us to find within our own hearts and within our own psyches and our own spirits reasons to come together and form a community? We hope you enjoy the rest of the week. Have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.